Anyway, I'm Andy Thorne, and I started my career in June of 1973. Actually, I started with CAL FIRE, or California Division of Forestry, Department of Conservation, and worked a couple fire seasons out of Red Bluff, California, in Tehama County, and then I moved. I was still in school, and I was recruited by a district ranger. Went out to the district to the west on the Trinity National Forest, or the Shasta Trinity, and became a fire engine crew member in 1975. So that's kind of how I got my start. And at that time, I remember I was connected through people, and one of the dispatchers here actually, I used him as a reference, and I think I applied for the Plumas, the Mendocino, and of all things, the Ready and Hotshot crew, because I think in the summer of 1975, I think they went back to the detail program. So they had a couple years in there where Reading was I think 72 and 3 you could hire on as temporary help. You didn't have to have an appointment. So then I went from finished that summer of 75, and I actually finally got on a hotshot crew. I applied to Region 3 on the Lincoln, and they were just forming. And I think at that time Region 3 was on a build-up mode for hotshot crews, and they'd had some pretty nasty fires, like around the Mogollon Rim, the Sitgraves, the Coconino had experienced some large fires up in their timbered country, and I guess they were beefing up the resources. So the New Mexico side of Region 3, I think Lynn Biddison was the director then, or it might have changed. But so I got a job. I got hired. I went to, of all places, Ruidoso, and with the ski lift, the mountain, and everything else that's involved around, because essentially you're still a temporary employee. And but I noticed the one thing, the training had become. I went there and I started work, I think February 23rd of 1976, and we had fires already. So it was like dry. It was a dry year. I think things were already set for the 77 drought. And so things were pretty dry, and we ended up down in a place called Mayhill. Jumped on we had a bus, of all things, and it was a yellow bus. It was like a school bus. We didn't even have crew carriers back then, and but the fire, it was on what was called the Sacramento River. And seeing, growing up in the North Valley here, the Sacramento River is this big body of water, and I'm thinking I could literally jump across the what was down there in Mayhill called the Sacramento River. And I think it was the prior year of 74, the Lincoln had a large fire that, and in the 70s, 20,000 acres was a pretty sizable fire. I mean, that was a major catastrophe, fire behavior, and it burned in Mayhill there. I guess it was 17,000 acres there, the Mayhill fire. So with all these things that had happened prior to, I think, Region 3 hiring, and everybody was new. So here's the Smoky Bear Ranger District, named after the little bear they found on I think the 1953 fire that was on West Capitan Mountain there in the Capitans, and where the actual live symbol of Smokey the Bear was found by the New Mexico National Guard, I believe, and then they used him as the live symbol. They sent him to the zoo. And what's kind of ironic, in the end, I think in October, late October the 23rd, a bunch of us went. The little bear finally died in 1976, and then I was a crew member on the crew still working. We went and attended the original living symbol, the little Smokey the cub that you see pictures of. He's all band-aid up, and they're flying him to, I think, to Washington, to the D.C. Zoo is where he spent his life in Washington, D.C. So that was kind of a neat thing. And then the fact that we were named after, the crew was named after the little bear. And
you were just saying before you designed the crew logo?
I did, actually. It was, and to this day, because I put my patch that I wore on my, in those days, we didn't have packs, and so it was made up. The web gear was made up, military surplus, the flat GSA bottle. They did have the canteen holder, so I would load up. I'd have like 6 of them holders with the little flat canteens, and so what was that, 1.5 gallons, I think I was carrying. What's that, a quart each? So, but we used the Filson vest, which was like the Okanagan vest, a modification of a timber cruiser's vest. And our first helmets, though, I remember they were pretty ugly helmets that they had ordered. The district there in Ruidoso ordered these helmets, and finally, I think in June we got our red. The metal helmet was kind of going out, so we had these red Bullard helmets, which were pretty cool. And we got our new logos put on, and a little Forest Service shield on the front and your name and all this. And so we thought we were organized. I think the biggest thing was we probably lacked some training. I don't think they, training was as far as what your crew foreman and the assistant foremans are going to teach you, because you still have the basic 130 and the 190, and there was no such thing as refresher. It was just this is what you're going to do now, is out of the book from the fire management, or actually the Forest Service handbook had a section on fire, right? Is that the 51 section, right? And the Forest Service handbook's a whole other thing, because it's huge and it's got all this directive in it. But anyway, so we went on that summer. We got going, but I remember immediately and it was funny because in those days, our crew in Region 3, and I don't know if all the hotshot crews, there were some other brand new crews, I think Carson, Santa Fe. The only crew that I think that had been around a while, well, they were, was the Gila crew. And then Silver City started a crew. So, and then on the Arizona side, there were a lot of crews that basically, if the district could round up 20 people or 25 people, and they were kind of handing out the word hotshot pretty freely. It wasn't like you had to agree on anything or comply. You had chainsaws and all your hand tools, and you were equipped and had transportation. There was some training, and then you would, we either show up at the airport to get on a little plane, a Twin Otter. I think we flew quite a few times to Arizona, but there was also the Convair that we flew outside the region to different locations. But the springs in New Mexico and Arizona, the Southwest used to experience the monsoon in July and then kind of August. But up until about the end of June, we'd get a lot of lightning and a lot of fires. We'd always end up over on the Tonto National Forest. We used to call it the annual brush cutting jamboree on the Tonto. So you either got stung, bit, or poked by something. Rattlesnakes, some kind of poison oak, or a bee or something would bite you, or snakes. So there were a few of us, I remember, that had come from California, from the California region, that came with some knowledge. And I guess after my brief extent with CDF and then the Shasta Trinity, because I had experienced some campaign fires while in California before going to New Mexico, so that kind of I had a little foundation built there. And then a lot of the people that were, a lot of the young men that were hired then were either local, right there in town, because they just put out a flyer, hey, and it was the old 171 a simple civil service form that you filled out, and then they'd actually call you right from the office. So it wasn't this huge the job thing now. I mean, it's like totally difficult to not only apply, but then to get selected or an opportunity to work. It seemed so simpler back in those days to get hired on. Just get a phone call, hey, come on down, we're going to do this. And then you had to do a step test. And I remember a lot of physical, the whole thing, we used to drive to this track over there by the school and line out, and the assistant foreman, that individual, he was from the Marine Corps, so he liked the calisthenics, jumping jacks, the whole push-up, the whole, I forget what, the squat, thrust, back up, squat, thrust, back up. Then you'd throw a jumping jack in there, and then you'd go back down to your knees and do your push-up, back up. You know, it was like 6 or 7 counts, 1 through 7, 2, you know, so we'd do like 50 of those. And then we'd run around the track. I think back in those days it wasn't, we're going to go for a run like on some dirt road or out in the woods. It was, here's the track, you're going to run like 25 laps or something, you know. So, but as a young man, you know, I went there, I was 19, so and there was a lot of other 19 and 20-year-olds, and I think that might have been just under the average age. And there were a few older folks that were then, you know, 25. Man, that guy's old, you know. But things worked out, because through the course of that summer, 1976, we spent a lot of time after all the refresher and training. I remember finally we used that one bus. We called it we put on their Smoky Bear Hotshots in it, and I'll actually have to show you crew pictures with that bus. Our red shirts, we looked pretty good. There was a lot of we had a lot of haircuts, weren't a big deal back then, so it was like, you know, I think the culture then was people were still long hair. I mean, very very few cowboys that worked on the crew back then, and but we did have a lot of fun. I think the majority of the time, and that's probably why I lasted so long in the firefighting community, was that, you know, every summer and every fire season, you find those reasons inside yourself that networking with people and meeting different people and coming back for that same that culture that you're learning and instilling in other people as they're coming up, or when you become a supervisor. But you know, it was always back then when I was an early hotshot, and that summer lasted from what was it, the 23rd of February till November 1st, I believe. So is that what, about 8 to 9 months? So that, and it was a double season. I remember by the end of the monsoons, and they would get some lightning, a little dry lightning, a little wet lightning. We had traveled, I think up to Wyoming, and spent most of our time over in Arizona on the Tonto, and then locally there was the Gila and a place called the Cibola, which was a real dry area between Albuquerque and Ruidoso. And Albuquerque was to the north of Lincoln County. And the fire behavior, I mean, it's the same as what they're getting today. And I remember my superintendent had, I called him a superintendent, the crew foreman had come from, he spent a summer, the first summer that Reading had their program here in 1967, and so he's actually in the first crew photo out there. And I think at this time he's passed on, because here recently, right before I retired here last June of 2013, young crewmen would ask me questions, and I would say, well, gosh, those people are retired, or they're dead now, you know, they've passed away. And then I remember my second after the second year, well, by 1978 I was still in New Mexico, but my engine foreman then had spent the summer of 1977, because that was by 78 I was on an engine, so I'd left the Hotshot crew after 17 to 18 months. The next season was a little longer. 77 was a record season. That young man, Robert LeMay, was on the 77 crew, and I know that was a stellar year for the national fire scene and movement of resources. When I think, hotshot crews then, I think there were 36 hotshot crews maybe that were recognized as resources available to large or project type fires. Oh, we did go to Minnesota, and that was one of the highlights of the whole 1976 was Minnesota, and flying up there in the dark. I hadn't done a lot of flying till kind of on the hotshots, and so flying at night to Minnesota from, I think, Alamogordo with the Gila crew, and I think that was it, just those two crews, Gila and Smokey Bear, the old Gila interregional crew. And we got up there, a place called Lake Isabella, and it seemed like every morning, then we had paper sleeping bags, and it was like, and I'd experienced paper sleeping bags before, but you'd wake up and there would be dew. It was because the moisture, the relative humidity up in Minnesota in September is like, it's almost like you've been rained on. But by 2 in the afternoon, they had the peat bogs and almost like Alaskan taiga, the tundra stuff that was. I remember digging down the first night up there, and we were out doing hand line in this like carpet stuff, and I thought, what are we doing here? The thing I remember, one of the things I want to go back to leadership is that I guess you have trust in your crew foreman and your squaddies. We had 3 squad leaders, and we had 1 foreman and an assistant, and each squad had a function. And I think I was put on in what was called Squad 3. So I had my local young man that was the squad leader had grown up there locally on the link, and so for whatever reason, Squad 3 always got everything that was left by the other 2 squads, things that weren't done or leftovers as, oh, here's an assignment, they need to go take care of it. So it was never Squad 2 or Squad 1. Squad 1, they basically had the saws and were in a few Pulaskis up front doing the major putting a dent in the ground so that the other 2 could come through and see what was going on. But I always remember just following the guy in front of me. It was kind of like, here, so I'd turned 20 in June of that summer of 76. So, and I thought, okay, I'm learning something. I've seen some fire behavior out here in California, and then, but the whole Minnesota thing, I think we were up there for like 25 days, which was a pretty good assignment. And now and then it was the camp food was. They called these things. They were called a hairnet, I believe, and it was like a little net. I think the bag was in the net or something, but they would just drop these in there frozen in trash cans and boil them. And so, but you were getting hot food, which was a nice thing, but they were always kind of consistently the same. They might have had 3 different menus: hair bag 1, hair bag 2, and hair bag 3. So it was like everybody would fight over hair bag 3 because it was the Cornish game hen, and then nobody would eat hair bag 1 because I never had a hair bag 1. So. But the thing was, a lot of the regions on large project fires, that was, and it was almost like you were in a big spike camp. So we're out away from civilization, and that was the most convenient way, cost effective, and meets the objective. We're going to feed them, and everybody's going to get the same thing. There was no variety, and I don't even know if there was a nutritional value to the hairnet, except that the meat eaters, everybody liked hairnet number 3 because it had the little chicken in there, and it was pretty tasty. But there was a few times, and I remember being up there, it seemed like it just went on and on and on, and as a young man, right now I'm trying to think about the weather got really dry as we were up there, because I think Michigan were having a large amount of large fires at the same time northern Minnesota was burning. The upper peninsula in Michigan was actually having some large campaign fires, and I think a lot of Forest Service hotshot crews I know from Region 6 came through our camp, one being the old Deschutes crew, which is now Redmond. They came through our camp, ate dinner, and left, and the news was, they're headed to Michigan. Everybody was like going to Michigan. But we were left on the Isabella fire, and spent that pretty much the whole month of September there. Well, you had what they called I think a blue spruce and a Norwegian spruce, which was a real little stunted, like a full mature spruce would be maybe 100 feet in height, and just with a lot of moss, just covered with moss. And the moss wouldn't just grow on the trunk. It fanned out through the tree itself, so it was all on the branches and kind of hanging. And then when you had perfect conditions, when everything lined up at the right time, the fuels and the weather, and we'd get some winds in there, and it wasn't something I paid a lot of attention to, except, okay, hey, the fire's blowing up, and wow, we'd all stand there and watch it, right? That's a natural thing with humans, is that it's exciting and we're going to watch the fire. But at the same time, I remember the fuel with the ground cover being that it wasn't really Tyke. It was like a Minnesota tundra that we could dig down like 2 feet or a foot, and you'd hit the permafrost. They had permafrost, and I don't know if they have permafrost now, because it's 40-something years later, or about that with the environmental change and global warming, that maybe Minnesota doesn't have any more permafrost. So back then you could dig down, and there was, you really couldn't hit dirt. It was permafrost, but there were areas that you could dig down and actually scrape some dirt, and it was really rooty. So we basically cut one side and then just pull it back kind of like a carpet. And so it made it really convenient. But I remember finally being there with that fuel type, we switched to day shift, which I think the management at that time, the team running the fire was called the Blue Team from Region 3 that flew with us up there. And they were, I think it was Bill Buck's team out off the Coconino, and all of his components that make up the team back then. I guess there were probably Class 1 teams and Class 2 teams, and I think that was a Type 1, or they call them a Class 1 team. They like to use the word class for some reason. But that length of stay there, the fuel, actually in a few days there, I remember the division, his name was Major. Just he had one name. He said, "Call me Major." And he was from the Ouachita. They're out of Arkansas in Region 8. And a bearded fella, a little older, probably mid to late 40s. And I think he had a lot of experience. And one of the things he told us to do, there was 3 of us, and we were out, I think, doing some work. And the whole crew was kind of spread out that day. And the fire it got up in the crowns and made a pretty good run. 10, 20, 30, 40 acres. But at that moment, it was like we were either going to be stuck on this side of where we're at, or get back across towards where there's a lot of water up there, and get back over where the rest of the the crew is. And basically at that time, I wasn't even thinking the safety thing. It's like you're a young kid, you're following the guy in front of you, but you're listening to your supervisors. At that time was Division A, and we're just three crew people. He just says run, and I look at my buddy there, and it was like, run. And basically he wanted us to run in front of I'd say it's probably 100-foot flame lengths, but we're out, and then you're running through the kind of a shaded, timbered area, but the forest floor is this is that carpet again, so you're not really getting good footing. You could trip up in it. You got your weight and all your gear, and I think we had one guy with a saw, so it was like we're hauling all this stuff. But he goes, run. And I'm like, and I look over here to my left, because I remember the fire was coming from the left, from the north. And I thought, okay. But he led us. It was like, well, he's running, so I guess we'll follow him. And at that point, it was, we made it to the other side. And actually, it wasn't that far, maybe a couple 100 yards across through the woods there to this other point. I think it was a shoreline and a clearing to get away from the canopy, the timber. And which was pretty exciting, because even to this day, after all those fire seasons, I remember that one day when that guy from the Ouachita said, run. And
you basically ran in front of the head of the fire.
We did, and we were, and I would say it was probably 100 yards off to our flank there as we ran out in front of it. And I think that's part of training. I mean, even though I remember doing when I came on and got hired down there, we had the classroom time, and we did all the book work and the binders, and I still have all that paperwork to this day, the tests and all the stuff, and the kind of basically is what they're teaching them now, but maybe a little more. The recipes changed a little. But it was still the same basic fuels, weather, topography. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, when it comes to that part, we've added a lot of things to complicate stuff. But yeah, when everything lines up, it's like common denominators, right? And that's a big thing. That was a big thing back then, and we'd talk about it. And then I think we were using 10 and 13, I think. Right. And now it's 10 and 18. And I'm not sure when the 10 and 18 occurred, but 10 and 13, and there was no limit on, I don't even know if we got per diem back in the... Oh, I think I did get a per diem check, though. Per diem. But the 10 and 18... it's funny because right at the moment you don't address a lot of things because you're thinking about the fire and not maybe thinking, where do I apply? When you learn these things, you want to be able to recognize the problem and apply the situation from your... we didn't have an IRPG. I think the Fireline Handbook had... I think the squad leaders carried Fireline Handbooks, but the crew member, I think we had our idea pad and a pen, but there were no pocket guide book, an IRPG like we use today, or that they're using today. I can talk about that later, but the whole Minnesota thing was a big wake up, and out of all that, the camaraderie and learning. Like lessons learned. You learn something. I think one of the things in camp was, gosh, if you had day shift and you came in, by sundown, there was probably, you better prepare for the mosquitoes because they were going to tear you apart. Mm-hmm. That was just one element of the situation, which was living and traveling with a hotshot crew where the insects and the environment that would just tear you up. And so that was quite the time. We came back in September, and I think we continued to have fires we went over to the Gila. I think it was that at the end of in November actually. The Gila got, I think they were getting lightning fires of all things, and so that was one of our trips up through Winston and out through the Beaverhead to a place called Negrito, which is way out in nowhere, beautiful country, and you're in the largest stand of the bottom of the largest stand. The Pier Ponderosa runs all the way up to the Prescott from the Gila there. It's real pretty country. And but then I'm not concerned. I was, waiting that, they're going to feed us. So we went and did a couple shifts on this little fire, and then we bust on into. I'm trying to think. Yeah, we had what we called the fire freighter. That was our hotshot transport. Was this school bus, and it was a small size school bus. So actually, you could get that thing up to like 53 miles an hour, and the bus driver wasn't a crew member. He was hired to just drive the crew haul then, and I don't think we had seat belts though. So, but the concern was, they're going to feed us at Gila, at the Negrito. And Negrito, we pull in there, and I didn't know this was where the Gila interregional crew. Actually, this was their station, their home station out there. And there was, I think, an Alouette 6 was sitting there on the pad. It was a big helicopter base. The Gila liked helicopters. Region 3 liked helicopters, so it was a big deal down there. And then the hotshot crews. And I think at that time, the Gila being a huge force too, that traveling around on the Gila was a great experience. But midway through June, we probably hit, like from Mount Taylor which is way up by Grants, to the Gallinas fire over by Corona, to the Mountain Air, to another fire there in Mountain Air, which is up on the Sandias right there above Albuquerque. A lot of small local fires right in the town of Ruidoso. I think the one I remember mysteriously started, and the crew foreman or the assistant foreman is running the crew, and so basically the town's in panic, and so it's like the city fire department's having a problem. I think there were some structures that were either threatened or on fire, and so you have urban interface in the woodland right there. I mean, it's like a lot of what we call pinon and juniper, and some large junipers, but these B-17s were flying out of Alamogordo, and they are coming in. I don't know if, I'm sure there was a regulation on height from the ground, but at ground level, these guys are hitting the top of that ridge. It just seemed, 50 feet from the treetops, and breaking junipers off like 50-inch DVH, and not only breaking the tree, the tree away from the stump, but tearing the roots and the stump out. So it was tearing the tree out of the ground and breaking the tree off. That's the kind of Phos-Chek or the slurry they were using then was really heavy, rock hard. Basically, I think they dropped on that house and it did some damage. They were dropping so low. But that is the thrilling thing about firefighting, was when the aircraft comes in, it's like it's kind of a word of mouth, like, hey, you can see him coming around, get back, okay, he's going to drop here. We know that's what's going to happen. So, and I remember that day. That was an exciting day for everybody, the civilian population in town. I mean, I don't think they've had a fire since the Gavilan Canyon, which actually burned the year before, 1974. Gavilan Canyon burned, and I think now if you go back, I haven't been back on the Lincoln since late August of '78 when I left there, and I showed up in December of '75. But Gavilan Canyon was one of the other reasons, with all the fires that they had in the previous year, for the large buildup. And then in '75, that summer actually too, because this was the summer of 1976. So then we came back around to the I think it was March 1st of 1977 we geared up, and our first big campaign was March. It's like, that's kind of wintertime, sort of. And so we got on the Twin Otter and flew to a place called Sholo, and we were out. Actually, we flew into a place called Winslow, and then drove to a place called Shevlin, which is a ranger station on the Sitgraves, but out on the edge of the plains and the timber where they both meet there. And you're probably like at, gosh, I think you're like 6,000 or 7,000 feet there, and that's where we had the hairnet thing again. Region 3 liked using the hairnets, and that, I don't think that anybody had invented the MRE. And another big thing that we used to eat a lot of were the military rations, which were just a little gray box, and all the cans in the box were green. So they were the military coated green with a little spec number on it. And I think one of my favorites, though, was it was on there, it listed as pork slices in juice. And yeah, well, and it was meat, so I devour that stuff pretty quick. And a lot of people didn't like, I guess it would be like canned ham, basically, is what it was. So, and then with the round disc flour, the cooked flour, which was called a cracker, you could invent something pretty good there. But and then the cheese spread, which was in another little can. But the funny thing is, it took forever to open the cans with the P38. You come with the P38, and then I remember that next summer we were after that fire, it snowed on us, and that was called that trail goes down onto the Tonto there, Horton Creek. March 1977. So then from there it was April, and we headed off to Sadis Pass. So we got on the big conveyor this time, and flew with, I think, Silver City. Yep, it was basically a two-crew thing, almost like they didn't know about strike teams yet. And they probably did. They just didn't call it that. It was just a written thing, a word. Let's make up some more words, right? So we flew to Yakima, I think, and went out on a fire, Sadis Creek Pass, which is up on the Washington side of the Columbia River there as you come down into the Yakima Valley. But what was a great event that night, I remember working in the creek, and you got the Mark III running, and you're smelling the fumes from, that's making you sick, and it's getting cold. You're down in the bottom of this canyon, and then the rocks start rolling because it's real rocky country up in there. And we were actually pretty close to one of the main highways that runs north-south all the way up towards Wenatchee, I believe. And but the big thing was, all of a sudden it was like they had handed out the new, well, we didn't know they were new, but the modified looked like the commercial rations. So you got the same little box that was more of a brown box, same size, the same food in it, the same condiments and everything, but they had labels on them, so they weren't military green. It would actually say Hormel pork slices and juice, and you'd get the little macaroni and cheese. And I think one of my favorites was the beanies and weenies. That was pretty good stuff. And so you'd do a lot of hoarding, or hoarding. That's basically, I guess, the word is hoarding, or what. There's some other words we'd use, but
stashing food.
Yeah, and our little. I think all the hotshot crews that I ever saw had the Filson or the Okanagan, the cruiser vest with the large pocket. And what I always hated was those night shifts. We started with the metal headlamps with the electrical cord coming from the battery container. I think it held 4 batteries, And so then you'd get inventive and try to invent how to create your cord so it wouldn't get tangled up with whatever you're doing. Some people run it through their clothing and back out and up behind their shirt and onto their helmet. It was like, I think I just put the thing in. And they had a special little pocket on these vests for the headlamp container for the battery pack to sit in. Because it wasn't shortly after that they built a plastic container, which really was pretty cheap. It would fall apart. The little clip would always fall off, and your batteries would fall out. And there you were. But the headlamp was a vital piece of equipment, and so because night shift it would get cold, and basically up there on Sadus Creek, like for some reason, your April in Washington, it was like it got cold, and it went on, and then finally June arrives, and things started happening by the end of June. And this was a year that set a precedence with, I think, fire, especially in California, but everywhere. Because we traveled, I don't know, I have my old logs from those 2 years, and I think we were hitting over 50 fires as a shot crew, which was a pretty good count for back then, considering that it was generally just the hot shots that were traveling, and maybe you would, when fires got really large, if they got a lot of large fires, that they would bring in the contract crews that were the Native Americans from Region 1 or the Swift crews from Region 3. And it was probably a pretty small part of the program in the hotshot realm that you still had all these crews, and crews would show up, and I remember going at the end of July. They said that I think Santa Barbara had a lightning hit California, gone all the way up the West Coast. So our crew was getting sent to Smokey Bear was going to get to go to the town of Wenatchee on a detail, and this was probably my biggest event was in my memory of my hotshot experience, and they said, okay, everybody has to drive their personal vehicles. So it was like, oh man, that's like no supervision, and you have to be at this location on this date. So you got like 20 hotshots with probably 8 to 10 vehicles going in all but maybe the same direction there for a brief instance. But we all showed up in Wenatchee, and we basically, the forest there, the Wenatchee forest, put us in a hotel, which I don't know if that was the right thing to do either. But that was the greatest time. We started there, we did our orientation, we hung out up in a place called Iniat, and of all things, that's the home of the Wenatchee Bushmen. So, and they were having disciplinary problems, I think, kind of through some of those. 74 was not their best year, but they were a good crew, and they work hard. They had a name, just like all your hotshot crews. Things come and go with your style, and I think a lot of it evolves around the leadership again. That I think is the main the inspiration behind things. Either can be stopped now, or things continue, and either you have you can actually have a bad outcome. But so we end up in Wenatchee, and things were pretty good. And I remember driving around. They gave us weekends off, and gosh, it was just like we were doing things, but we weren't really getting any fires yet. And they just had a guy, Neely, I think it was, in the Gibson Creek fire perished. I think he was at that time working for the county or back on the forest, and he had jumped 1, 2, maybe 3 years there in Winthrop, and then went back to the county. And that was kind of a lot of people did that. They just go back to the city service or county and local agency to work and get out of the Forest Service. I remember he perished, and that was one of the things. All of a sudden, the east side of the Cascades is getting a large amount of fire activity, so all of a sudden they're pushing crews up to the Wallowa and on up to the Wenatchee. The Wallowa's in Oregon, and that whole east side was just getting hammered. But finally we made it down to, we had our government vans, and I believe, I can't remember if we flew or drove our vans. I think we actually flew over to Portland from Pangborn is the air base there, and ended up on a fire on the Mount Hood called the Happy Fire. And then from there we ended up, of all places, in Redding, California here, close to where I grew up. But and as a child I start reflecting on here the fire camps at Shasta College, of all places, and I'm thinking, boy, they're feeding us in the cafeteria there. And finally we went out on a fire there up on the Shasta side, a place called, I can't remember, and I've been up there many times, and it's up across from Lemoyne, up in that area. And I'll think of it. I'll think of the name of this fire, because there was my first experience with, we hike in there with the Rogue River crew, and we did like this night hike, and it's just the nastiest brush, and the fire, I think the fire was maybe 10 acres, but we get in there and it's like midnight, and here are all this burned up equipment. Well, it was the smoke jumpers were in there already. And so the next day we basically did a night shift and a day shift, and we contained the fire and controlled it basically at that point. I think the big hand was I think they were Redding jumpers that were in there, and I remember meeting the next day. All this gear had burned up, and then fiberglass from the helmets was everywhere. And then the next day we're working, and I remember cooking. I thought I had a regular can of chili beans that I had packed around with me, and I wasn't going to budge off the hand line. I'm a hotshot. And I'll tell you what, back then, in those years, I had the slightest idea what a smoke jumper was. And I didn't really care. And they were hiking out with their gear up to catch a helicopter and fly out of there. And I wasn't going to move my little warming fire. I was cooking my breakfast. But I met an individual who ended up becoming a great friend of mine through the end of my career, and who actually grew up in the town I grew up in, but he was smoke jumping at that time, and a great avid hunter. Anyway, he actually took the time to talk to me about things, and wasn't just going to go on up the hill. But so we left that fire, and that was a jungle, the Shasta, because here's my crew. Oh, you're from this forest, and they look at me. Hey, Andy. And they start criticizing my, the Shasta T this and the Shasta T that, and I'm thinking, hey man, I'm like, what was I, 21 then? So I finally had turned 21, and we're in the midst of the 77 campaign. Well, I think after that fire we headed off. We went back to the college, got back on a crew haul of some sort, and headed off to have breakfast at Beaver, up in Beaver, California, at the Cal Fire, or at the CDF, where they ran their hill attack out of Lassen County there. And that was a pretty good breakfast. They had bacon, eggs, and the normal breakfast. And but this fire was actually called the Scarface, which was a big fire, almost 100,000 acres. And we went back out. Okay, you're going to go to camp, and so we drive for hours out towards a place called Longbell, and ended up at not at Longbell, but the camp was by the power lines of some odd reason. And just the mix of crews that had poured in from Region 1, when I'd never really got to experience the coming from Region 3, I thought, well, they're pretty skookum down there. Region 3, good looking, the crews had good equipment, and they were all of the same type. where all of a sudden these Region 1 crews show up, and here's a crew called the Nez Perce Hotshots, and I'm thinking, and they're wearing like flannel shirts, and they're all, just, I guess they're college students, but just totally looked unorganized. And but then I remember one day we're in there, and here's the Reading crews in there, and and the big deal back then was on the back of your yellow fire shirt, and these were the good fire shirts, they would spray paint or stencil their name on there, and that was like, and at Reading Interregional, I always thought, boy, that interregional name, that's like the big time, that's the varsity of firefighting. And I thought, and here comes, I don't know, I think in the same day as people are mobilizing at this camp, and it was this large spike camp that was being formed up on one corner of the fire, I guess, so they could get a handle on this whole Scarface thing. I actually have some very nice convection columns of that event, so you'd probably like that. And along with the white bread lunch, the sack lunch that had the white bread, and I'd look at my friend and I'd pull the mint jelly thing out, and I thought, isn't this what they serve at Thanksgiving? And we're supposed to put the mint jelly on our white bread, and that was like a couple of dry carrot sticks, and I'm thinking, there was no meat in that lunch. I'm thinking, no meat, I'm getting mint jelly that's a decorative thing for Thanksgiving on white bread. And I'm thinking, boy, that is nutrition right there. So that caterer, whoever was making those lunches, I don't know what they were doing, if the food unit leader or the camp boss was doing his job, but during that same course of time, we spent probably a week in that camp. But I remember another crew that showed up that was strapped right to the hilt, and they were the Sawtooth, another interregional crew come from Idaho, and they were still wearing metal helmets, and they were a beautiful blue, painted blue, and you talk about crew cohesion and unity and their association. They had it together. And their crew boss, boy, this old boy, but they all had the Levi's or Camp Bustums with the brown, what are those shirts called? Brown, like what CAL FIRE made me wear. Just like a military shirt, basically, is what they were wearing. They weren't wearing a service shirt, but it was a work shirt, a button, long-sleeve work shirt, and they all looked the same. And their cuffs were all rolled probably to 3 inches. So, they were spit and polish, and you could tell because they all of Anglo descent, and that was part of the culture then probably in the potato region of Idaho, that the farm boys that were coming out of that area were going to get these jobs there, and but they were strapped out, and I'm sure they had a production rate that was pretty high end back then in 1977. So I think Sawtooth, they were probably in their 10th or 11th fire season by then as an organized crew, and I would see that, and I would think, gosh, we were still basically at that time, because in the year before, in 76, when Battlemont happened, then we finally got wearing the fire shelter became mandatory. Like, you had an option before that, before July 17th, and then the whole new directive, but they actually issued fire pants, Nomex. So by the next summer, by the next fire season of 77, except for here comes Sawtooth, why are they still wearing their like Levi's or dungarees, or what they were wearing, blue? But they were probably all cotton. But the new fire pants, I looked at our crew and I looked at these other crews and I thought, man, we still look pretty good, and I take, because image is a big deal, and it doesn't matter what age or what crew you're with. And in the bitter end, production's important, and your objectives, and okay, this is what we're doing for the shift. This is your time period you're going to work. But you got to look good while you're doing it, and you got to look good when you show up, and you got to look good when you leave. So, and I think that in the hotshot world, boy, and I think it's still a big deal now with the crew colors, the shirts, the sweatshirts, the ball caps. We had ball caps. and they were red. Our shirts were red, and I remember when I designed that emblem with, basically I think I took the emblem from the comic book that was the little Smokey the Bear story that was about the 1953 Capitan fire. Somewhere in there I just took basically the image of the little bear hanging on the burnt tree and just did my own rendition there, my own concept of it on a paper, and then kind of took it to, we had these huge placards that we had at the station that we'd painted, and that were back in New Mexico there at Ruidoso. And even to this day, I think, I remember I was in Alaska in 1991, and we jumped this large fire called the something. It kept getting, they kept re-staffing the fire. It got huge. And so we were out there, and all of a sudden, here's my old crew. I hear Smokey Bear up there, and this is 1991. So I'm meeting some of these guys, and my original engine foreman from 77, or from 78, who when I went to the engine after the Hotshots in 78 as the assistant tank truck operator of a Model 70, which was 600 gallons of water with a 12 speeds. It had a 6-speed stick with a 2-speed rear end. And 2-speeds are kind of gone to the wayside now with the types of automatic transmissions they have, the new Allison all-world transmission, right? You can't mess it up. But the computer can mess up, though. But anyway, Bobby LeMay, there he is up in Alaska, 1991, and I'm thinking the next time I saw those guys, I was on my engine as a captain in 2005, out on the way on the edge in BLM land, east of Cedarville, California, in Nevada, and here they show up with their nice, huge Chevy 3-ton units. I think they had 3 of those units, and the soups rig. So they had 4 units. Here's Smokey Bear, the new Smokey Bear. They didn't have a school bus, and the soups rig has this quad in the back. And old Dolphin and Rich Dolphin's running the crew. And I'd known Rich for a while. I met Rich. He was an old McCall boy, and I met him in Alaska in 1984. So he's running Smokey Bear, and I'm thinking, as things progress in years, all those loops start closing, as your network of friends and people that you associate with, which is probably the greatest value to this day. When I'll sit at my house and look at things and reflect on the people and events. But it's all those little things like the hairnets and the firefighting. But I tell you, we saw some good fire behavior over on the Tonto in places. In one particular situation, we were up on a ridge that was all rock, so we were pretty safe. And this was called the Ord Fire, July 1976. So it's a year before. I'm going back 1 year again, and because we spent a lot of time over there, Pumpkin Center, and the fire's just rolling down the hill, and then our soup or the foreman's like, "Hey, we're gonna cut line here." I think it was with Prescott and a crew called Hannigan, which was from the Apache. And because I looked at these, I talked to the Hannigan guys. I thought, where'd you guys come from? Who's Hannigan? I was already learning hotshot history. Like in my early days, I was collectively thinking, and there were so many crews in New Mexico and so many in Arizona, and if you weren't on my list, you weren't a hotshot crew. So Hannigan shows up, and I'm thinking, Hannigan, huh? Boy, that sounds Irish. But anyway, we end up down in this drainage, and luckily we were on the edge of the drainage and the rock and what became our safety zone, and the fire rolling off the hill. And I've got pictures of this event too in the column, and we hear Del Rosa's way. They come from Southern California. Here's the great Del Rosa comes over to the Tonto from Southern Cal, and so that was like a big name back then, and we're working with Hannigan, and so it's like, well, okay. But that fire, I tell you, you can't, when it goes into transition, and we've learned that back then, 90 years ago, and even today, we learned it last summer, that things change real quick. And I just remember standing there, and we're in, like, I don't know if it's oak and teal or some kind of oak or red shag or whatever they called it down there, and just brush, and like tree brush. It's just all brush. It's all hardwood, and small brush, big brush, dry grass, and it comes rolling off the hill. And then the foreman of the squad, he goes, "Hey, it's spotted behind us." And luckily, it was just in grass, and we got a handle on it. And then finally, the thing just pushed right up to our line, but it was like pretty intense. I would say, 50, 100-foot flame lengths again, right in our face. And I'm thinking, yeah, maybe we should move away from here. Finally, in pretty quick order, we what is it, RTO, right? Let's get out of here. So we boogied down and across into the wash where the dry creek bed was, and up this ridge. But and what's odd is that whole drainage. By the time we left, if we would have hung out down there, we probably we did have fire shelters, but it burned all the way out onto the alluvial, which is the washed area and the smaller brush. So it burned off the mountain and right down. And I'm not sure what the tactics there were, because, hey, again, when you're a crew person, you listen and your squatty informs you of what he knows. And that whole briefing concept, I think back in those days, it was fire behavior was probably the most important thing, that you watched what was going on, and not so much that someone's going to spin weather or the anticipation or pre-calculate something. Like nowadays, they'll just say, hey, when you go to briefing in fire camp, they're taking information and lessons learned, kind of like, okay, this is what is going to happen today, this is going to happen tomorrow. Well, I don't even think they had fire behaviorists in briefings then. It was like, here's operations, these are the divisions, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go out and you're going to either mop up coal trail or put in some indirect. And there was a lot of indirect back then, but there was a lot of hotline. We got tons of hotline, because we would show up on a fire and it's already 10 to 50 acres cranking in PJ, pinon and juniper again. And so it's not up to the local district like a Type 3 organization. It was like, here's the hotshot foreman. He's going to take over the duties. He's not only going to call the shots, but he's kind of running the crew a little bit. And hopefully the lookout, we've used lookouts. I remember the Hannigan guys in this situation when we were on the Tonto. That was July of '77. That they were using. These guys were our lookouts, even though we could see what was happening. It was pretty evident. So, and getting back to fire behavior again. I believe it was August of '76, though. We were down in Las Cruces, the town of Las Cruces. The fire camp was they did put us in a hotel, though, actually, one night. But then after that, the fire camp went to the high school there in the town of Las Cruces. But it was a BLM, on BLM, Bureau of Land Management fire there in a place called the Oregon Mountains. And it's just a huge pile of rock, huge rock. And so we drive to the edge of town, and it's brush, all brush, thick, kind of the same stuff that grows on the Tonto. And these large, long drainages that go from the alluvial plain back up the canyons, maybe a few 2-tracks out there and some game trails. Luckily, you'd get on a ridge line, and that's kind of where you stayed in the rocks. That was kind of your safety zone. You didn't want to be down in these large basins, draws, or canyons. And I think, I'm not sure what crew was down there, but they actually did at that time, you couldn't really call it a backfire. I guess it was a burnout, but there was fire moving down the canyon towards the town. But when they lit that thing, and I remember watching that, our whole crew was up on this hill watching this event with another shot crew, and that thing almost looked like a vortice reaction to the weather and the fuel, and then the fire coming down the hill, and the amount of time it took in the large space in miles that it consumed so quick. That the flame front was so large and it laid down. It was just incredible. I never did at that point. I don't think I had my camera or ever got any. Actually, I do think I have slides of that occurrence. I used to record a lot of anything I could. I used to carry a camera all the way up until the bitter end of my career, and not that it was bitter, but to the end of my career, I think that documentation was an important thing. I've got piles of pictures, fire behavior, people pictures, socializing type, people. But that was probably one of the greatest, at that moment, that fire behavior to that time, and even to today, I'm thinking any large, great fires that I went to in the span of my career, either from Southern California, I think some of the best fire behavior was in Region 3, that either on the Tonto or over in, for instance, this BLM fire, the Las Cruces fire is what it was called. And it didn't last long, because usually in the desert the brush burns and that's it. You go through another burning period, and then you're walking on some ash with sand and what's left. So there's not a whole lot of duff out there in the desert. But that was a great, huge event there with that, the way that thing moved, the behavior there. Thinking the only other thing that I can compare that to, that moment, that day, and I'm thinking I've been on a lot of small fires, large fires, probably I've been on career fires around, I'm thinking I never actually counted them. I did count them, and it's up around 800, which is a few. So either from a small little IC type 4 fire or a campfire like a smoke jumper type fire to actually parachuting into a fire where there was no fire. So we thought it was a fire. It was a water dog that we identified as a smoke, but it wasn't smoke. So I'm talking straight to the camera this time. And that was an event, but that was years later after my hotshot years. So, but the hotshot years were long ago, and then finally when I turned 22, the next summer of 1978 is when I went to the Capitan Work Center, which is still in Lincoln County. And the Lincoln's is a great pretty large forest, and extends from the Texas border up to the Capitans, and then from there you have the Cibolas on top of it, and then from there that runs up to the Sangre de Cristos, which is the Santa Fe, the Carson, then you're in Colorado after that. But that was a great experience, and I think today if I was to say something, I'm glad that not that you put things together when you're a young man and figure out. It's always kind of like the lessons learned, and then you figure it out. Well, that the leadership that we had actually had some pretty good training for that day, considering the superintendent had attended the Reading program in the first year of '67, and then my next foreman, I think I'd mentioned this, was also came from this program. So I felt, and I didn't put any of that, and I didn't value that, that, and I think that's the thing. If somewhere in there right now, we can take those crew people and those young people that are between 18 and 25 or 30 and make them appreciate what value and how to learn value, how to extract value out of either something that's physically happening, or they're being taught something verbally or through written direction, and that it doesn't always have to come from example, but generally it's through on-the-job training is how you learn, right? That's how you get from point A to B usually. But I think the hotshot experience there for me, even to this day, and I remember all the good things and flying so many places, and I should get my roster of fires out and remember all that stuff. And each fire that I was on, there's always that special event that happens, either through bonding or some association with fellow crew members, or an event, whether it's small. I know there was a lot of when you're off the clock, because that was pretty important, that you weren't going to get paid, but you could be in camp, and but you're going to be off the clock. But we used to work shifts that would go generally 21 hours, 20 hours, 21 hours. I think there's 24 hours in a clock, right? Yeah, midnight to the next midnight, or to midnight. So obviously that's all changed. You know, in my later part of my career, with the staffing levels and the 2-to-1 work rest and the 14-day tour duty, the days of going for 30 days or 50 days, you know, Yellowstone in '88, or just traveling and not coming back to Redding here, going to McCall and coming back 50 days later or something, but not spending all 50 days on you're on an assignment. So I guess the way they've written the assignment thing can be whether you're in a hotel, in a fire camp, actually on the fire line, and getting quality rest of some sort. So one of the things I remember, the aircraft, some of the aircraft we flew on, from, like, we'd fly into Phoenix, we'd fly out of Phoenix, and they put us on an old, it looked like I think a DC-6, or actually it was, yeah, DC-6, but it had no seats in it. And so we actually climbed up a ladder to get in that thing, threw all our bags in, all our red bags, and I'm thinking that was the first year we actually got a red bag, because before that it was just the green knapsack with the leather straps and the buckles, which was kind of cool, but you couldn't put much in there. And because that's the first thing you learn, how to pack your little bag when it all started with the Forest Service. And that DC-3 didn't have seats, so we all sat on one side of the plane, and they had one large 4-inch cargo strap with a ratchet on one end, and basically we were all secured with one strap. One strap secured the whole crew. It was kind of, you know, one strap deal, right? And at the other end, so you had all your cargo, and then you had all the people basically using the same strap. So then you could hardly see out the windows because you're down sitting prone on your rear. You're back to the bulk, and one engine smoking, like burning oil, like bad, and then blowing oil. So it's not only burning oil, it's blowing oil out of the exhaust ports. And we're thinking, I guess this is the way it is, right? This is normal. And I'm not sure if that plane was probably on some kind of contract, and maybe they inspected it when it went on contract, or they just decided that these guys need to get home and this is the available transport, right? We never flew commercial back then, it seemed like, until sometimes you'd go to Alaska, you'd fly back commercial, or you'd fly commercial up to Alaska. And I'm talking later on in my career, like in the 80s and 90s. So, but going back to the hotshot years, it was always the Twin Otter, the Convair 580, and which came with stewardess, but they never served you anything. They were just there to load you and unload you and smile, which was cool. And I remember going to a fire in 1977, before the big siege. It was early June. We flew to the Medicine Bow in a little town, Saratoga, and then there was another town, Virginia City. And this fire was like getting up there, a couple thousand acres. But it had started out as what we found out, which I thought was ironic, kind of funny too, because the district, Wyoming is not known for big fires or fires in general. Like, yeah, they do have some good seasons. They've had some good fire. And but it was a training fire for their district, or maybe even at the forest level, they were putting on a actual live simulation, because that's what we used to do, was a live fire. That's how you learn. We're going to light a little fire. The FMO, the DFMO, District Fire Management Officer, that was his title, District Fire Management Officer. He had these assistants, the ADFMO, and then they went out and lit a fire, but I guess it got out of hand, and then it became a full-on suppression effort. And one of the things, and I was always aware of this, was the tree roots on those, and I think there was a lot of lodgepole up in Wyoming, and those roots don't grow deep. So here we are doing day shift, and we have like a little wind event, and we're mopping up, and you could see the areas that had vast areas that had crowned out. I think I have pictures of this event too. So the trees just start toppling like dominoes, like crazy, like a lot of trees at one time, and I don't know if it was the soil just in that small ecosystem, but they were coming down like candles, and so that was kind of a scary deal, and but a lot of work for someone to do, a lot of firewood, and but camp was back at the ranger station, and I'm trying to think of the kind of food they fed us. There was very few times that we actually got to go unless it was on the Tonto, because the Tonto seemed to have money. And I think the money came from the lake. Lake Roosevelt was recreation, so they had money to spend. And when they had these large fires on the Tonto, then you get a full-on camp, which meant you were going to get a caterer that could feed you actually something resembling a restaurant-type food. And but other than that, you make do with the hairnets and the rations, the sea rats, and I've got lots of sea rat stories. I was actually a fire line spam specialist with cooking spam on a shovel and creating different things out there after shift. Of course, you have to show a short time period in that 24-hour clock again. So, or you had to justify it on paper, and so